this is Howard at BigHBricklin.com, and today we're going to be looking at a Bricklin frame that's in a ground-up restoration process. The Bricklin frame is actually a very rigid frame, box construction. It's the kind of frame you'd expect to see on a custom hot rod. The only weak place we have on the whole frame is the spring tower connection right here. One of the biggest problems with the spring tower connection is there's a missing weld on mid to late 75s right here on this tab. Putting a screwdriver in it demonstrates there's nothing there. You may find a few skimpy welds, such as this one right here, that may need to be re-welded. And some of the welds could have been taken a little bit farther, such as these right here. Up front on the Bricklin frame, the upper control arm reinforcement brackets may be missing some welds right here. One of the things you'll have to do is put your glasses on and look for any broken or missing welds. This car ran off the road one time in its history, and we did find some broken welds. The best way to do that is with a rubber mallet. Tap on the frame and the sheet metal. If it rattles, doesn't make a solid sound. I can hear that rattling from way over here. We got a broken weld over here. Metal in here. Very good way to detect problems in the frame. Before you do any repairs to the frame, any welds that need to be reinforced or added or broken spot welds, you have to fix the missing weld right under the bottom here of the front tower connection. And when you're doing that, you have to spread the towers out to the correct dimension. When we do the weld repair on the missing weld, we also add a reinforcement piece that fits right down here. Before we do any repairs, I'm going to demonstrate just how much the missing weld down here weakens the spring tower. Now, all the weight of the car is nested in this area because the spring is mounted here on the upper control arm. Very similar to a Ford Mustang. When the car is hitting bumps and moving around and you're steering the car, everything starts moving up here with this weld missing, and to the point where it starts breaking other welds. And come on down here and I'll show you a place where the weld was actually cracked. Right here. It's starting to pop loose on the frame. I've seen much worse. The first thing we're going to do is tape together two 40-inch rulers. And I've already got a mark on the left-hand spring tower and one on the right-hand spring tower. Then I'm going to use my little vice grip sheet metal clamp the ruler down. Now we're going to push down and pull up on this part of the spring tower right here. Now, I'm not a heavy guy, so you're going to be surprised at how much this moves. So as I push down and as I pull up, that ruler starts dancing all around. So I'm pushing down. Now we're going to pull up. I'm not putting that much effort into it, and it's moving a lot. Now, the correct spring tower to spring tower dimension is 45 inches. So we're going to preload this 1/8 of an inch. So we're looking for a 45 1/8 inch measurement from spring tower to spring tower. Now everybody asks, where do we measure this? So right here on this piece of metal, where I'm making the X, is where you put one ruler. And then over here on the other side, where I put the little X, is where you measure the opposite direction. So I'm going to set my ruler. These are 40-inch rulers, so 40 plus 5 is 45, and we're going to add 1/8 inch because once this car sits on the ground, it'll be right at 45, just from normal flexing of the frame. But it isn't going to go any farther than that because this will be rigid. Now, will it fit? Da-da-da. No. We're about a 1/2 inch off with nothing on the car. So how do we fix this? So here's where you have to step down here and take a look at the next piece of equipment. It's a porta power, and that's so I can figure out how to put everything back in the box. This is already set up. Okay, and we're going to set this part here on the ground, and we have to untwist it. Put this from spring tower to spring tower. Now, what we're going to do is spread this out. So we get to 45 and 1/8 inch. Ooh, we're almost there. Make sure our ruler's in the right place. Put it on the X. Pretty much dead on right now. That is dead on. The next step is to get your spot weld drill or a drill with a spot weld bit, or you can use a Blair cutter, anything to make a 5/16 hole so that it can be welded back together properly. Down below here, we're going to have to put this right in the middle of that tab so that we can plug weld to the frame. If you weld around it, it won't be as strong. You can weld around it after you make the plug weld, that's fine, but you don't want to weld too close to the corners or the whole piece of metal might crack. This is pretty loud, so you're going to have to put some hearing protection on. Now you can see the plug weld in the middle of the tab. This side is done too. The next step is to make sure the tab is firmly up against the frame. Clamping would be a good idea at this point. Hammer down the cracked welds before repairing. We're going to weld the connections really fast. Plug weld the center of the tab and then lap welds around the perimeter. This one looks good. And that one looks good. To put the reinforcement pieces on, you'll have to grind the welds flat. Don't remove an excessive amount of metal from the tab, it will become weak. Time to weld the cracked connection on the side of the frame, on both sides. That's the kind of weld that should have been there in the first place. And additional welds on either side of the top tab. Now we're going to do a test to see if these towers are moving anymore after welding the tab in place and adding in some additional welds to the skimpy welds they did on the rest of the connection. So let's see what we got. Focus on this arrow right here. I'm going to lift at this point, turn the camera, right here. Now I'm going to lift here and then I'm going to push down. So go back to the arrow. I'm actually going to lift the whole frame up off the jack stands. No movement other than me shaking the ruler. So Nothing, absolutely nothing. Check the dimension now and see what the dimension is. I'm going to set this exactly on 45. And will it fit? That's a perfect 45. Nice. So now we're going to put additional welds where the upper control arms mount. This reinforcing plate is only held down at the bottom right here, and it needs a 1-inch weld here and a 1-inch weld here. Some Bricklins have one or both of those welds, but they generally don't have all the welds. On this car they welded the back side. Sometimes it's welded and sometimes it isn't. So now we have the additional welds on the upper control arm reinforcement. These are spot welds up here. And when they are broken, you have to get a spot weld drill with a flat drill and drill out the welds. We've already done it here. Then we have to clamp everything together so that we can get a proper plug weld. Now, we got our plug welds in. Sounds good. No rattles. Bring it in here to look a little closer. Plug welds can be ground flat or shaped to look like spot welds. Now the next part is to put in the Big H Bricklin front spring tower reinforcement braces. They go right here, as previously stated. We're going to clamp them in place, but before we do that, we're going to clean this metal and spray some weld-through corrosion-resistant primer on both surfaces. We're going to clamp this in place. Hammer the tab over the old weld. Now after we do all the plug welds and weld the tab both on the plug welds and the side, I'll take a look underneath here all the way down and make sure you clamp that tab firmly to the frame. Now I am going to add one more weld here. Alright, once again all the plug welds, and then the additional weld would be right around this area here. Do not weld into the corners. That will cause a crack to form. Leave the corners unwelded. And it's one of the most important steps in giving your car world-class handling. And there's one thing to take care of at the rear of the frame. The right rear shock mount. On this Bricklin, you can see there's a really crappy weld right through here. There's a partial weld through here. The plate should be welded through here, here, and here. And there's nothing there. And right here, you can see it's starting to crack. So what we're going to do is weld this, this, and this. And then we're going to put a reinforcing plate across this back area. This is what the reinforcement piece looks like. And here's where the reinforcement goes. It boxes in the shock mount nicely, gets rid of all that flexing, and you can weld it to the frame right here. And here we are with all the welds. We have welded in the reinforcing plates, starting with welding it into the frame, boxing in the shock mount, and then filling in the places where there was missing welds here and here, And here we cleaned up this skimpy weld and actually double stacked it. That's a little excessive, but it'll work just fine. Keep in mind that one of the reasons why this fails is from people putting too heavy a shock absorber on a Bricklin. These shocks cause damage to the cars they were put on. They're too heavy for the Bricklin. So which one's the correct shock? You're not going to believe it. But it's the smallest one in the bunch, right here. Heavy-duty shocks are no substitute for worn suspension parts and rotten bushings. And this is what happens when you put air shocks on a Bricklin. It ripped the lower mount right off the spring. I hope this video has been helpful in your restoration project. I'm getting back to work.